I've heard Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz talk about those three sectors before of healthcare, housing, and education. The way Ben Horowitz described it is that, look, you go and you look at flat screen televisions, and if you graph out the price of a television over the last 40 years, it plummets and the quality of the product, has exponentially improved. You look at education, you look at housing, you look at healthcare, the exact inverse is the case, both in terms of cost and arguably quality as well, in certain cases at least. What is it about those three buckets that have resulted in such stagnation, do you think?
Well, sometimes education is just hard to do because not everyone is a willing partner. But you look at healthcare, education, and housing together, they have this common feature. Supply is restricted and demand is subsidized. And using basic economics, that is a recipe for higher prices and very often uneven quality. And that's what we see in those sectors. I mean, you mentioned Ireland. It's so hard to build in Ireland. It's become land of NIMBY. But so much of America is becoming land of NIMBY. So home costs, just the cost of buying a home to send your kid to a better than average school, it's much higher today than in the 1980s. So that's a major social failure. It's a big reason why so many Americans and some Irish people are upset.
NIMBY, by the way, stands for not in my backyard, I believe.
Yes, it's very hard to build important new structures in San Francisco, New York, many parts of Ireland. The price of rent can be astronomical. It cuts into middle-class living standards. It makes it harder to move into cities as an engine of opportunity. It results in greater, stronger class divisions. It's one of our worst policies.
So I love that breakdown. Supply is restricted, demand is subsidized. So to tackle that is one route, I'm assuming, that arguably could apply to all three of those categories, is to unblock supply, which seems to be happening in education, not necessarily the kind of education that results in the prestige and reputation transfer that organizations when recruiting still look for, but at least in terms of just knowledge acquisition and skill acquisition, irrespective of having a specific diploma or certification, it seems to be happening, that supply is becoming unrestricted there.
Slowly, but a bit, yes.
How do you, what is the solution to unrestricting supply or reducing the degree to which demand is subsidized?
Well, you need to start at every level. I would sooner unplug supply than get rid of demand subsidies, at least for now. It's not fair to take away people's subsidies when it costs so much. But let's take the very top schools, Harvard, Princeton. They barely take in more people than they did in the 1960s, 70s. And yet the world has so many more eligible people to go there. So I would like to see those schools expand their slots by 2x, 3x, 5x, whatever it takes. I would like to see the best of online education put on a par with face-to-face education. It is not a substitute, but should you be able to easily do 20% of your degree online and have it be fully accredited? Absolutely. At the K through 12 level, it should be easier to do homeschooling, charter schools, micro schools, all kinds of innovations. They are starting now in part because of the pandemic, right? A lot of options were taken away. We had to let people experiment. So I'm hopeful for that future, but it still isn't here yet, and the product remains very costly and, again, uncertain in quality.
Yeah, it seems like reducing the bottleneck on education would likely help to solve the healthcare piece of the equation. Housing is trickier because you've got constraints at the level of physics, but I'm not sure about the extent to which those constraints are real. I read an article recently talking about a city in Japan versus New York, and it was emphasizing that the land constraints were the same in both of those cities, but the the price of housing, in the Japanese city had slightly declined, whilst in New York it had drastically increased over the last 50 years because of innovation in the buildings and freedom to innovate within this Japanese city. So I'm curious what the solve that you see is for housing. Is it building up? Is it, what does that look like?
Well, I think the market mostly should determine that. But if you look at Washington, D.C., or for that matter, Dublin, they are not super tall cities. There's plenty of room to build up. I think it's fine to say we'll protect the historic core, and say in the case of Dublin, but there's plenty of place to put new buildings. It's just hard to get them built for reasons of law. So, when in doubt, if you want the price of something to come down, say food, you increase its supply. The same is true for buildings and rent. There is, in fact, in America, plenty of space. The Southeast in general has allowed a lot of building. It's a cheaper place to live. Texas, for the most part, allows a lot of building. It's a cheaper place to live. California, Washington, D.C., in this regard, they should be more like Texas.
So I was at an event in Miami that Elon Musk was looking at, and he was describing in detail what it was like to build the Gigafactory in Texas.
Yes.
And he got it done. He got the thing built from start to finish, the guts of it at least, within 18 months. And it had been completed a number of months before he was giving this talk. And he was emphasizing that if he had tried to do it in the Bay Area, he still wouldn't have finished the first round of permits.
Correct.
Yet it's completely done in Texas. So what is it about the states that are making themselves accommodating to builders like Elon, versus states like California that aren't? What are some of the key variables that either make a state conducive to building and creation versus not?
California is very complacent. People have their homes, say in Marin County. They feel everything is perfect. They don't want anyone else stepping on their lawn. They don't want too many immigrants living near them. They don't want too many tall buildings that might block their view in a particular direction. But the end result is stasis and lack of opportunity. Texas has a more can-do attitude, not in every area, but certainly in this area, in a sense that they're the up-and-coming parvenu, and they want the good new jobs. Think how many high-paying jobs that Elon Musk factory is creating. It's remarkable. Texas feels it needs those jobs. That's great. I worry Texas will end up becoming too much like California. And Californians are moving there. I hope they don't bring their bad ideas with them.
I think they do. I
know.
Personally know so many Californians who move to Texas, but then vote exactly like they voted in California, which I find very ironic. I also think there's potentially some hypocrisy within NIMBYism in California, because aren't a lot of the residents within Northern California, like Marin, very much so, self-identified progressives and liberals? It seems to me that there potentially is some hypocrisy between holding those ideals or beliefs and then also having, when the rubber meets the road, the prioritization of the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard.
I consider myself the true progressive. I don't think they're actually progressives anymore. It's just a label they've picked up. They're anti-progress on many issues.
That's interesting. I would love to hear you break down what you see progressives, again, using progressive in the most conventional current sense of the word, where you think progressives are truly progressive and where they are, potentially regressive or at least not progressive.
They're a diverse group with many different views, right? But I see a significant subset that is not a big advocate of economic growth, not a big advocate of cities, suburbs, actually changing and developing, wanting to freeze certain ways of life, making regulations tougher, making it harder to move to a new world of green energy, in spite of all the rhetoric. A lot of them are anti-nuclear. The Pacific Northwest, they're on the verge of closing down a bunch of hydroelectric dams, which will not all be replaced with solar energy. Is that progressive? In my book, it's not. So I don't mean to damn them all, but I think too many anti-progressive elements of thought have crept into the progressive movement.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.